Welcome back to another Boxscore Geeks show. I'm your host, Dre Alvarez. You can find me on Twitter as Nerd Numbers, and with me, as always, is our producer, Brian Foster, who you can find on Twitter as Boxscore Brian. Give a shout out, Brian.
What's up, Trey? Another great week is down the NBA. A little more of the same, maybe a little different, and yeah, we'll talk about all of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've said this many, many times. We love it when the NBA is live. It changes things so much from the off season where we're kind of like searching around for topics to where there is always something to talk every day, regardless. And actually, let's get into our kind of first topic on that. Something I released on the show this week or the site this week, and something I'll be doing every week. Hopefully, a lot less work on my own. I'll be kind of crowdsourcing it from some of you, the listener. And then, of course, Brian and Patrick will help as well. It is the Box Score Geeks Top 10. It's the internet. You got to have top 10 lists. And basically, we're the Box Score Geeks show. So what we're going to do is during the NBA season, every Monday, I'm going to release to you our top 10 box scores from the last week. This is a subjective list, so it's not like we're not going to be boring. We're not just going to come out and say, here were the top 10 points over par players last week, or here were the top 10 points efficiency or whatever. We're going to say, here are our top 10 favorite box scores from the last week, and we're looking for, anything. We love stuff like Russell Westbrook just recorded a triple-double. We're recording this on Tuesday night, and Westbrook put up a triple-double, so that's a prime candidate. Things like Andre Drummond's two 2020s. We're a sucker for that. I mean, I looked for that, Brian, last week. I think there were only three 2020s last week. All of them made the list. I'll have to keep track of it over the season, but I'm fairly certain a 2020 just guarantees you a spot on the list. It's kind of a sucker's bet. It's our favorite. It's the Moses Malone play.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we even look for bad box scores. Now, as I mentioned in the article I put up today about Kobe Bryant, I do have a little bit of, I think the pronunciation, it's a German word, is like Schadenfreude, which is like delight in other people's misery. So Kobe Bryant and Brandon Knight, former Milwaukee Bucks Brandon Knight, both made the list this week, but they made it for bad reasons. So that's kind of our general plan is top 10 box scores, good box scores, bad box scores. Didn't get as many this week, but, interesting box scores. He didn't quite count, Brian, because one you've named, and I guess one of our commenters has named, we call it a Russell Westbrook box score. He calls it a DeMarcus Cousins box score.
Yeah.
And this is a box score where they get like 20 points but miss 10 shots and get like 10 rebounds but, get four fouls and, get eight assists but get four turnovers. It's like they do everything good and everything bad. Russell Westbrook did make the list last week with one of those, but he was so good. Like, when your rebounds and assists are so good and your shooting efficiency is good, then all the missed shots, all the turnovers, all the personal fouls don't matter. But, interesting box scores like that too. So we're really excited about this. It's something I can't believe it's taken us a few years to just do this, but I had a lot of fun doing it, and I'm excited to do it every week. Figured we could talk the list we did this week. I don't want to read it all, so if you go to the show, it's this Monday's post. I'll put a link to it in the links. But Brian, were there any those box scores that I put up that you really liked, or I doubt you've put the work into it, but any you think I missed?
No, I haven't looked through that, but yeah, I love this Westbrook box score that we got up right now. He didn't have any blocks though. What's that all about? He had everything else except blocks. But he, 8 rebounds, 11 assists. That's tough to do, and he followed up with the triple double tonight. So, yeah. So here's the thing about these Russell Westbrook or DeMarcus Cousins box scores. They like you said, they can be really good, and I think people get too caught up in a player needs to be perfect and do everything right. But that's not true. You can look at the aggregate of everything and decide if it's good or bad. So, I mean, when we're going to talk about Drummond a little bit, right? People still complain about his offense or the way he looks or his energy and things like that. Just got to look at the production, guys. And Russell Westbrook has been coming through.
Well, I mean, the thing about Drummond's offense. So let's talk Drummond. So
Let's get into Drummond.
This was the painful one. So I was impressed. So if you're a daily fantasy sports player, Anthony Davis last week, November 6th, he kind of had an off first week, as I mentioned. It wasn't like he was playing bad. He was still getting like 20 and 10s. But, just last season, this was the guy that was putting up like 25, 12, 3 blocks, 3 steals every night, it seemed like. And so it's kind of having a middling start to the season. And then he, bam, November 6th comes through, puts up 43 points, 10 rebounds, 4 steals, 3 blocks. You're like, Drummond, or not Drummond, Davis is back. And I basically it was over a 70 if you play daily fantasy sports. He put up over a 70 on both FanDuel and DraftKings. I was like, easy, he's going to win the week. And then, I looked over the box scores the next night, on Sunday night. That's when I put this list together. And I was like, Drummond, I was looking for 2020 games and I expected to find Dwight Howard's because I knew that had happened. And I expected to find Andre Drummond's and I found three. And I looked and I went, oh, wow, Drummond got another 2020. And he put up, a 29.27 rebound outing. And not only that, he could have put up 30 or more points if he knew how to shoot free throws because he took 6 free throw attempts and only made one. So it's fair. Like, I'll give it to you. Drummond is one of the few players where Hacka whatever is actually a decent strategy. So the reason, like, Hack a Shack was a strategy people employed because the logic was, if we hack him, he can't shoot free throws. But that wasn't true. If you can shoot free throws better than like 52, 53%, you basically are shooting like as good as one of the best offenses in the league. So even Shaq in his heyday, when he was missing all the time, you didn't want to just hack Shaq every play because he would still score very well. Now, of course, if your options are Shaq's got a clear shot at the rim from 3 feet away, or you hack him really hard and he has to go to the line, of course you take the, probably 1 point, maybe two over the guaranteed two. And then, of course, the risky part on the Hack a Shack is if he manages to power through you, it's like guaranteed two, maybe three. So Drummond does have glaring weaknesses in his offense, particularly his free throws. And I don't think, I haven't looked at his shot charts, but I'm fairly certain he's one of these players that, needs the ball at the rim. But he does so much good on offense that you can't even really convince me that he's not a good offensive player. And I'll try and look this up quickly, Brian. But like an example counterpoint player that I always talk about is Ben Wallace. Because, basically I've used the line, people would say that Ben Wallace was playing, you were playing 4-on-5 on offense. And I always kind of took umbrage with that, mainly because if you kind of like looked at Ben Wallace in his prime, he would get like, so I'm looking at this, like the Pistons that won the title in '04. Ben Wallace got 5.1 offensive rebounds per 48 minutes. He still managed to, in 2004, get like, some points. He wasn't great at it, but he was able to get actually 1.03 points per shot. He didn't get a lot of shots. He only got, 11.8 per 48. That's like less than one every 4 minutes. But he wasn't not contributing on offense. Sorry for like the double negatives there. And this always bugged me. It's like you were saying, you have to look at the aggregate. How much are they contributing? And if you look at like Ben Wallace back in the day, his offensive rebounds and efficient shooting, and nowadays look at Andre Drummond's absurdly insane efficiency on offense as well as offensive rebounds, you can't tell me he's not a net positive to your offense.
Yeah, absolutely. And, whenever I go back and forth with people about this on Twitter or whatever, it's not like people think Drummond is bad. I think it's more like all of a sudden his expectations are unreasonably high. Like people actually do think he's one of the best centers, if not the best in the NBA now. So they're like, oh, only 15 rebounds, Drummond. What are you doing?
Well,
So
that's never going to be the case. I mean, give me a break. If you hit 15 rebounds, in particular, right, it's worth noting that you are banged up, right? Andrew, but still not back. I think Festus Ezeli is like getting the starting spot, which is interesting. Bogut's turning into a Manu Ginobili-like character. But the Warriors are really, really good, and they're really, really good at everything, including things like rebounding, things like defense. So it's like, it's unreasonable. If you're playing the Warriors, for me, it's unreasonable to watch and say, wow, why didn't you do better? What I'll say is like the Warriors played horribly and they still beat like bad teams like the Kings, like the Nuggets by like 10 points, by like 15 points.
yeah, people are distraught about that 9-point victory over the Kings. If it's not double digits, it's not a real win, I guess, these
That
days.
was a horrible game on their part. I will say that. Like Steph Curry shot horribly and they only beat the Kings, the horrible Kings by 9. I was going to say, how did you, I did notice, so I didn't realize this until after I made the list, and friend of the show, Ben Gulker, noticed that 5 of these players are Pistons, and obviously, or current or former Pistons. And I was going to say, how do you feel about the fact that no Warriors made this list?
I mean, maybe that's the same thing, just expectations. We could easily just put, all 8 of the Curry box scores up there and marvel at them, but it's just not as interesting, right?
He did have a bad game recently, 1 or 2 bad games. I will say, a streak that he had that probably would have, like, if we'd done week 1, of course, Curry would have been like half the list. Curry started this season on an amazing streak, 6 consecutive games of 68% true shooting and at least 15 attempts per game. And I haven't had time to like go back and look through the list and look at like Michael Jordan, but I've got to buy that's rare to be able to shoot that well and that much. The stat line we use is net points. Basically, you take a
Yeah.
player's shots, you take a player's points, and you have to subtract the shots from the points to get a net. Because most people, like when they look at Allen Iverson, they'd say he's averaging 30 points per game, and you're like, yeah, but he's averaging 30 shots per game too. So big whoop. But someone brought up that Michael Jordan started a season in 6 games, 214 points. Steph Curry started a season, 6 games, 213 points. And then what I noticed is I was like, well, holy cow, Michael Jordan had to play like 45 minutes a game to do that, whereas Steph Curry was doing that in under 36. So I noted that and then went, wow, I wonder how many like this net points, factoring in efficiency, how amazing this stretch is. Haven't had the time to look that up yet, but it's something that's on my radar.
Yeah, net points is great. So that's basically the scoring component of wins produced, right? It's actually if you take in
Yes.
the efficiency and everything together.
That, to be honest, when we talk advanced stats and metrics and stuff, and the two metrics, which are they're basically at the core the same. There's wins produced, which is how many wins we think a player contributes to their team, and points over par, which is in an individual game, the margin of victory we would expect our player to give our team if they were playing a completely average team and they were on an average team. So those are the two things we look. They derive from the same. It's just basically different units of measure. One we're using wins, one we're using points. Wins are very related to point margin. Any like Vegas gambler will get this. Where if I know the spread of a team is on average 8 points a night, that can tell me how good that team is. I expect it to be a 55 win team or whatever. So the scoring component, like you said, the one thing that basically wins produced and points over par takes into account that many other metrics don't is shooting efficiency. It's kind of remarkable to me. I put this on Twitter today that basically we give players credit for shot creation. And if we look at the rules of the NBA, that is honestly the only thing that the rules mandate you have to do. They don't mandate that you have to box out and get rebounds. They don't mandate that you have to pass the ball 4 times like in Hoosiers. They don't mandate that you have to play good defense. They just say at the end of 24 seconds you have to take a shot. And this isn't the box score. This isn't the play-by-play. I haven't had time to track it down, but shot clock violations are rare. Any team can put up shots. And so it's very important that you care about efficiency. You care about how well a team is doing with the shots they have to take. And that's why you don't care. Like, let's get into our next subject. So let's talk a little Kobe. So Kobe Bryant, I'm a horrible person, but I'm delighting in his horrible games. And my favorite thing when I looked this up is on November 8th, Kobe went, I think, like 6 for 19. And at the end of the game, I looked at his true shooting percentage and was trying to find a team that had shot as bad as Kobe. It's worth noting that in the last 3 of Kobe's last 4 seasons, he's basically shot as bad as like the worst team in the NBA throughout all of like as bad or worse than the worst teams throughout like all of the 90s and the 2000s. So basically, this is something that always drives me crazy. When someone says a player is a shot creator, their logic is that player needs to shoot like that to get other open shots. And, they couldn't just replace those shots with someone else chucking up. And basically, if I can say the 76ers are shooting as efficiently as you. In fact, the 76ers this season, I believe, are shooting more efficiently than Kobe Bryant. I'll look that up real quick here, Brian. But so looking at Kobe, he actually ended up having the exact same shooting percentage as the Minneapolis Lakers. That was the last season the Minneapolis Lakers were in Minneapolis, 1960. And it was 44.4%, and that was actually worst in the league. So Kobe Bryant is currently shooting about as bad as the worst team in the 1960s in basketball. So, and by the way, they were so bad that basically that's what got them the draft pick that got them Jerry West for comparison. And, I get driven nuts if anybody says Kobe has to be taking those shots because he doesn't. You could give those shots to so many other players and he would, they would do better things than Kobe is doing with them. So looking at Kobe, I looked at that. I got some Schadenfreude. I put him on the list. And all I can really say about Kobe is he's clearly done. Like, obviously. I would hope that's obvious to anybody watching. And then I put up an article about that today, and my basic point was, yeah, Kobe's done. He's clearly not a franchise player anymore. Philadelphia 76ers, by the way, are shooting .46 true shooting. So Kobe is worse than the Philadelphia 76ers and the Brooklyn Nets, both of whom have yet to win a game, just for comparison. But so I'm curious your thoughts on like the article I wrote, Brian, because basically my point on Kobe Bryant is he's done unless something weird happens at the end of this season when his contract is up. The Lakers should cut ties with him or drastically cut his salary and role on the team. And I basically said, you're right, but why shouldn't Kobe enjoy himself and stay delusional? Because earlier this week I got a chuckle out of this. He released an article where he said, "Hey, um, I'm loyal to the Lakers. I'm going to be a Laker for life." And I went, "You're saying that when nobody would pick you up. There's not a team in the NBA that would even attempt for Kobe this season, right? So Kobe this season, $25 million contract. I don't care if it's trade deadline. There is not a trade that they're, $25 million for salary. The way the NBA works is one of two ways. Either A, you have to be under the salary cap to be able to just absorb the hit of a player's salary. And so, for instance, we'll probably talk this in a bit. The Memphis Grizzlies, who just grabbed Mario Chalmers, that's essentially what happened. They had an exemption in place where they were able to just take on more salary. That's one way a trade can happen. The other is you actually have to trade close to $25 million in assets. So there's not going to be a team in contention, which even if they're in contention, you wouldn't want Kobe, that's going to have either $25 million in free cap space or $25 million in assets to get Kobe. And then next season, I can't buy any team targeting him. So that's pretty much where he's at. And I just said, he's done. He's done after the season. He has to know that. And if that's the case, why not live it up for one more season? Why not put yourself in the news with trade hypotheses? Why not, shoot a lot of shots and say you still matter? It's kind of such a weird life to be an NBA player. And a lot of the bad, the toll on your body and all that is really rough long term. But it's like if you enjoy the limelight, he needs to soak up the limelight because after the season, it's probably going to be gone or greatly diminished.
Yeah, I mostly agree. Kobe, I think someone could take a flyer on him at a lower contract. Someone who wants to bring out fans, maybe. Someone who, I don't know, maybe is behind the curve on shooting percentage and stuff like that. I think if he wanted to keep playing,
any team that picks up Kobe, and that includes the Lakers, I will mock so harshly next season, even if it's a min contract. So sorry, continue.
No, that's it. Like, I bet if he wanted to drag it out, he could. Like, someone would say, "Yeah, Kobe, we'll put you, as a backup and mentor our young players." Of course, I know that's a terrible idea, but I can see that line of logic, going through some desperate GM's room. But at the same time, yeah, of course, Kobe himself is behaving rationally. He's been put up on this pedestal for taking all these shots and making some of them. And, he's scoring a lot of points, and people like him for it. So keep doing it, Kobe. Keep on shooting.
Keep on shooting, keep on talking, because it's done. It's always so bizarre to me because basically making the NBA at any level is essentially winning the lottery. And you're trying to, and in my opinion, you should try and cash out the biggest payday you can get. So when I see players, Tristan Thompson this last season, interesting note, Tristan Thompson, I don't know, we haven't crunched tonight's games yet, but at least going into tonight was the best player on the Cavs according to our numbers. So that's a good pickup on their part. But what I was going to say is, you've got this limited window to kind of grab as much cash as you can. And there's all these weird rules in place, like where you're drafted, your restricted free agency. But it's like you really should maximize it to the best of your ability, including your exposure, because when you're done, the player that I'm reminded of when I'm looking at Kobe, there's a fantastic book called The Showtime Lakers by Jeff Pearlman. And he talks a lot about kind of the twilight of Kareem's career. And, when Kareem had his last season, he had like a farewell tour, he was getting gifts. And the reality is it was kind of staged, right? The NBA was willing to put on this farewell tour for Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who, as I've mentioned, I still view as the player that Michael Jordan never actually unseated as greatest of all time. I'm sorry. But it was kind of staged and fake and phony because Kareem had been a salty person his entire career. He was horrible at getting autographs. He, rankled other players. And so, but he knew, he was like, when this is done, the ability I have, my social presence, the respect I'm going to get is going to go away. And we even saw that, right? Even having a job in the Lakers front office, he would get downgraded on play. He was complaining about that. He got downgraded on playing class. They never gave him a statue, which sounds like a weird thing to complain about. Well, what I should stress is it does pretty much show where you go on the pecking order. Right now, LeBron James can make crazy demands of Cleveland. Essentially to keep LeBron James happy, the Cleveland Cavaliers are spending what? over $100 million in salary. And I don't even know how much with the salary cap and luxury hits, how much that is. Like $200 to $300 million to keep LeBron James on the team with the hope of a title. You think when LeBron James retires, the Cavaliers will do anything for him? If he asks for a statue, will they care? That's just the point. So for Kobe, it's like this is his last hope to be anything. I mean, especially if the Lakers replace Byron Scott, who, oh my God, he's terrible. They really need to. If they get a new coach, a few unit players, they've already got like D'Angelo Russell, who's they're viewing as the future. They get a few players making more money than Kobe, a new coach, hopefully some better management. The buses are running things horrible, but Kobe won't matter in a season. So enjoy it now. Like why not? I always find it weird when fans kind of watch players act, like prima donnas or live it up or take advantage of, even we talk like maybe Lamar Odom. I don't want to talk too much about him, but the Kardashian stuff. It's like, why wouldn't you take advantage of that when you have it? Because when it's over, it's gone. That you're never going to get an opportunity to have that happen again.
Yeah, absolutely. And what the Kareem reference made me think of is, yeah, when I was a kid, Kareem was still playing in the league, and my friends all thought he sucked. He was old and over the hill. And I was just, at that point, there was no World Wide Web or any information or anything. I had no clue he was one of the best players of all time, but as far as my friends concerned, he wasn't good anymore. So that's kind of the opposite end of the coin. But nowadays,
Well,
I
no,
think people have a better perspective on it.
it's the same, and I think that the difference is Kobe is taking advantage of like the modern social media era where, it reminds me a lot of professional wrestling, where in professional wrestling, the WWE is in trouble. Anybody watching, Seth Rollins just got a major injury, and
Yeah.
he was their title holder, and they don't really have a lot else in place. Put Dean Ambrose over would be my opinion. I think he's the coolest. That's just because I got a picture with him once, and he was really nice. But they're not really in a good position with a lot of young players. When we went to WrestleMania last year, WrestleMania 31, they had Brock Lesnar and The Undertaker as two of the biggest names, and you go, these guys are like Undertaker's in his 50s. I think Brock Lesnar's close to 40, if not in his 40s. It's like you really need to kind of plan for the future. And so the NBA kind of shows the same thing, though, where it's like we have players that are now able to cash in on their like former respect a little more than they used to be able thanks to social media and stuff because people will still say Kobe's the greatest. I can tell when the Lakers are doing bad because people bring up this anti-Kobe tweet. I'm actually going to have to write this article at this point where I said I would take any random career I would take any random season of Chris Paul's career over any season in Kobe's career, which is only slightly hyperbolic. It's a little hyperbolic, but only slightly. And, people will bash me over that. And I can tell that happens when Kobe has a bad game because Kobe's done, right? The only way to be relevant is to look in the past for Kobe. And I do think modern social media and stuff has allowed players to do that more so than they would in the past, where, like Kareem legitimately did suck at the end of his career. And the ironic part was he was holding the Lakers back, and there's a funny bit of NBA history there. Sorry to get off on a tangent. But if the Lakers had been able to trade the Clippers outright for the number one pick in the draft that they picked James Worthy in, here's the issue. They had either the number one or the number two pick. They knew that for a fact. They wanted the number one pick, and they were going to use the number one pick on Ralph Sampson. They weren't sure if the Clippers were going to get the number one pick. And of course, if the Clippers got the number one pick, they were going to take Ralph Sampson. So the Lakers were trying to trade the Clippers for their pick so they could be guaranteed Ralph Sampson. And if they got Ralph Sampson, they were going to trade Kareem. So NBA history would have been completely different. And by the way, the Clippers under that was under Sterling. Actually, like I don't recall any of the offers off the top of my head. This isn't the same book, the Jeff Pearlman book. Basically, the Lakers were offering absurd trades, essentially for just the guarantee of the number one pick. It wasn't even the number one pick. It was just they wanted to be guaranteed the number one pick. They were offering insane deals to the Clippers at the time to get Ralph Sampson. And so history could have been different both for the Clippers and the Lakers because you put Ralph Sampson, who never amounted to much, on the Lakers and got a lot of their bench, and maybe they don't win another couple titles. And you actually put some assets on the Clippers, and who knows what happens.
That's funny. That's like the original version of Chris Paul going to the Clippers instead of the Lakers.
Yeah, it is true. It's the inverse, though. Obviously, it's
Right, the opposite. Yeah,
a trade doesn't go through and it completely changes. I'm listener. If you ever have a week where I phone something in, where like I don't have something to talk about. That's a good one. Basically, the Ralph Sampson Chris Paul paradox, where the histories of Los Angeles drastically changed two times based on two stars. All right. So that's I think all I had to say on Kobe, and we talked the top
One
10
more
list.
thing on this, Dre,
Let,
though. I had to bring up Kareem's stats just because I was curious. He wasn't that great the last couple of seasons, which is 87, 88, and 88, 89. But in the early to mid 80s, which was the period I was thinking about when my friends were saying he sucked, he actually was pretty damn good still, in his 40s. So Kareem really is one of the all time greats. I really want to emphasize that. We
well,
were wrong as kids.
what I should say about Kareem that was kind of interesting is one, what's really sad if you look at the stats we have on the Box Score Geeks is we miss his time in Milwaukee, and don't forget that
Yes.
he won MVPs and a title in Milwaukee before any of this. So this is not Kareem's best because it's worth noting that Kareem won the MVP in 1980, and that was his last MVP, and we can even see it. He degraded pretty rapidly after 1980, but he had something in common with Kobe, which was in 1985, Kareem had this bump. And if we look at 2013, Kobe had this bump. And then after that, fell off a cliff. So it's kind of an interesting. Kareem is a really interesting parable to Kobe, except that, and what's interesting to me is that we talk about Kareem being unlikable. I don't understand. Maybe it's the modern era and social media. I don't understand what's likable about Kobe. He's an alleged rapist. He's horrible to teammates. He's kind of a jerk. It makes you wonder how popular Kareem could have been had there been an internet around. Because, the issue is in Kareem's day, the reason he wasn't as popular is because if you're not personal in front of the camera, and that was the only feed people had to the players, right? Was camera. Nowadays, we have people advocating for how great players are, including the Box Score Geeks. So it makes you wonder, what could Kareem's kind of post-career have been like had he existed in the internet age?
All right, I'll speculate. This is gross speculation. Obviously, I've never met any of these two guys, but they kind of had different, difficult personalities. I shouldn't say had; they're both still around, but you know what I mean. Kobe, he's just kind of arrogant and doesn't listen to anyone else, and just does everything his own way, right? But Kareem was a little more socially awkward. Like he was a loner. He just didn't want to be involved in the limelight. He wanted to be left alone. So I think it's kind of that withdrawing from the whole NBA scene is why people didn't like him. But who knows? Maybe if he'd been around today with more exposure, he would have been more liked.
Well, it's also worth noting Kareem writes a lot for various sites. He actually does some
Yeah.
tweeting. So that would have been a lot easier, right? Because back in the day in Kareem's era, when like Magic Johnson thrived, wow, we are keeping it relevant here on the Box Score Geek show, talking the 1980s Lakers, second week or third week into the NBA. But back in those days, basically your only outlet to your fans was to talk to reporters like interviews or camera. And nowadays there's so many outlets for people, the internet, I have to say myself, right? The internet has given me a huge outlet and a huge voice. So yeah, sorry, this is way too much of a tangent, folks, but
Yeah. We
what
got
could have
15
been,
minutes left for
yeah.
more stuff.
Okay, so this was I liked flipping this. Actually, yeah, we'll tie these together, Brian. So during the off season, if you recall, for those of you that were listening, there was a drop off in listenership, and I take no offense at that. But in the off season, we had what we called was the wall of boredom. We would every week go over to ESPN and look at the transactions to see what news beheld the NBA that week. Now, what we have, I'm going to call this for this season, we'll probably go to it every week, is the wall of excitement. So if you go to the boxscoregeeks.com/players and you can click on the WP tab, which is wins produced, so you can either sort ascending or descending. This is the wall of excitement. It's what I go to every morning. There was a glitch in the numbers for a few days, but the numbers on Box Score Geeks are live. We're keeping it up to date every day. And what I actually want to do, Brian, is I want to flip it in reverse. So if you've got that page
All
up,
right.
I want to do ascending order. By the way, good news. Emmanuel Mudiay had a good game and is no longer the worst player in the NBA. Hometown Nuggets love there. Okay, so here's what interested me, though. So I was looking at the worst players in the NBA today, and three players really stood out to me. Kobe Bryant and Derrick Rose, who we have discussed ad nauseum, and we'll probably talk a lot more this season. If you're not Kobe Bryant or Derrick Rose fans, I'm sorry. Former MVPs that are playing horribly are just going to get talked about both in the mainstream media and here. But there's that. But another name that's at the bottom of this list that was shocking to me is Marc Gasol. Marc Gasol is playing horrendously this season. And it
As
should
are
be
the
noted,
Grizzlies overall.
yeah, the Grizzlies are terrible. And this lets us talk. We'll talk a little bit about the trade a little down the line. But I mean, a huge reason the Grizzlies are so terrible right now is that Marc Gasol has fallen off a cliff. And I should note this is a player that is an All NBA center, an All Defense center, a Defensive Player of the Year winner, which shows the absurdity of the defense. Like him and Tyson Chandler 2 years in a row did the weird swap of like got the most All NBA votes, but then didn't make whatever. So, regardless, what I was going to say is if you look at the Grizzlies, they are just, a train wreck right now. And a huge part of that is, the backcourt that was Zach Randolph and apologies, Marc Gasol just aren't doing great. Zach Randolph is below average. That's not terrible, but this is from a former star player. And Marc Gasol has fallen off a cliff. By the way, we've always mocked Jeff Green. No team should have Jeff Green. Why is Jeff Green on this team? Why is he getting 184 minutes? Sorry, brief tangent. And then even like Mike Conley in the past has played like a star, and he's only playing decent. So
Same with Brandon Wright and Tony Allen. Those are both great defensive players who are kind of average this year.
yeah, I mean, a lot of the players that are former stars who we lump Mike Conley, Zach Randolph, Brandon Wright, Tony Allen, Marc Gasol into are playing either below average or terribly. And then Marc Gasol has just fallen off a cliff, and they still have Jeff Green on the team. So, this team, it's shocking. It's, they're a lot like the Mavericks, where it's amazing because, what, last season, I think they won over 50 games, made the playoffs. And this
Yep.
season, they're looking like they'll probably hit the draft lottery if they keep going at this rate.
Yeah, in fact, they made it to the second round of the playoffs and took 2 games off the Warriors. They were ahead in the series 2-1, even,
Yeah,
or
they were
maybe
the
even
only
2-0 for that matter. They were great last year. So here's what everyone keeps saying about them: that age has finally caught up with them. That unlike the Spurs, they just haven't been able to, plug through their late to mid 30s as well.
I mean, well, let's point out that I mean, how old is Zach Randolph at this point? I'm going to cheat and go and look up the Memphis Grizzlies as if you want to keep talking for a bit. But I mean,
Yeah,
I already knew that Zach Randolph was old. Like, I mean, he was already starting to worry me on age. So okay, so let's break this down. If we look at the Memphis Grizzlies, they have Vince Carter, who is 39 years old. What are you doing? Matt Barnes, who has been good in the past, but he's 35. Zach Randolph is 34. Tony Allen is 34. Marc Gasol is 31, and it's worth noting Marc Gasol came into the league late, right, because he was a Euro player. So it's like, yeah, the only player, there is not a single player on this team other than Mark. The best players on this team are all over 30, and Mike Conley is 28, which is odd. That's his prime. We'd expect him to stay the best, but it's like, this team is really is old, and I can't actually dispute that argument for why they're struggling.
yeah, and I think I mentioned this on a previous show, but Grizzlies fans have been complaining about the lineups a little bit. That for one thing, so the aforementioned Vince Carter, who's 39, he has 16 minutes. That's one more minute than their good young player Jordan Adams, who I believe all of the draft prognosticators retrust, like Ari Caroline and Arturo Galletti and Lane Vasher. I think they all really like Jordan Adams. So even though the team's bad, they're just not giving him any minutes. They're giving their veteran bench players more minutes.
Well, it is worth noting that even if we really like a rookie, so for instance, we like Jahlil Okafor, right? And some people like Moutier,
Not
and
playing too well.
yeah, and we like Carl Anthony Towns, right? These players aren't playing star level. These players aren't amazing. It's hard for young players to be really good. That said, the converse of that, or inverse, whatever the erse of that
The
is really,
convex? No, sorry, keep going.
yeah, the really old players, right? Like, okay, I'm not going to buy that a 19, 20, 21-year-old rookie is going to play amazing, but I am going to give them more faith than I'm going to give a 39-year-old player because, I mean, as good as Vince Carter's been in the past, he's 39. So, that's all I got there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we'll see about the Grizzlies. Again, we can't get too into this. It's only been a couple of weeks. They'll probably turn it around and, at least be a 500 team this year. I mean, they have had to play the Warriors and some other good teams. The West is tough, so.
Way to keep us grounded. It's early in the season, and who knows what's going to happen. But it is a shame to me to see the Southwest Division go from basically being one of the most powerful teams in the or divisions in the NBA to basically being nothing. Oh man, I love NBA.com with the auto pop up. All right, so wall of boredom though. So we already talked Kobe, Marc Gasol. Derrick Rose, I may write this article too, so sorry to keep throwing out articles that may never come to fruition. If you're listening to this a few weeks in the future and I haven't written any of these, don't be offended. I mean, as a writer, you get lots of ideas. But one thing that was fascinating to me, right, is Derrick Rose is on this last page, and Jimmy Butler. So let's go to the front. Let's go look at the top 10 players in the NBA this season and and talk a little bit about them.
Hey everybody, Dre here from the future, just letting you know what happened. Right before we transitioned, Brian started talking about Andrea Bargnani. Unfortunately, he was muted, so there's a weird one-sided discussion that I ended up cutting out. Wasn't that long. But I did want to, leave in some of the closing thoughts on Andrea Bargnani, and couldn't really do that without explaining the segue here, because otherwise it would have just been a jump cut from that Jimmy Butler discussion to Andrea Bargnani, which wouldn't make a lot of sense. So that's where we're at. We're going to talk Andrea Bargnani a little bit before going to the top of the list. Now back to our original show.
And Andrea Bargnani, but it is really hard to be this bad in the NBA and sustain a really long career. So I'm really hoping Andrea Bargnani takes the crown of worst player in NBA history. And so when we see him climb these lists, it's funny. We're like the only people that when Andrea Bargnani gets injured, we get sad because we're like, he might not get a chance to become the worst ever. All right, so flipping the list in reverse, what I was going to talk about, article idea was basically Jimmy Butler's on the first page, number 3, currently in the wins produced formula with 1.8 wins over 8 games. And he's on the same team as Derrick Rose, who's on the last page, one of the worst 5 players in the NBA. And I really wanted to look at NBA history and see how many teams had like a top 10, top 20 player at the end of the season, and also had a bottom 10, bottom 20 player. Interesting team last year that fits this, by the way. Last year, the Los Angeles Clippers had both Chris Paul and DeAndre Jordan, and at the bottom of the page, one of the worst players, they had Spencer Hawes. So it's a funny one. I'd like to see more of those, because it's weird when a team's got an all-star and an all-time horrible player at the same time, and the Bulls fit that mold right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I would be interested to see how that goes. But this list, I think it's pretty similar to last week. Paul Millsap has climbed up. The Hawks have kind of gone on a run, although they did win a game or lose a game recently, rather. You're saying about Tristan Thompson, he's up there. Russell Westbrook, of course, and
huge name that's climbed the list, obviously, because if you recall last week when we were talking, we said he wasn't even on the first page.
Yeah,
Kevin Durant went from not being on the first page to being just outside of the top 10 in the NBA. And I tweeted a little bit about this today, but basically, it is amazing that the Thunder are going to get Russell Westbrook and Kevin Durant both playing this well next to each other, which is awesome. Ibaka has been troubling me. If you look at Ibaka's last season numbers and the start of this season, he hasn't been as good. And so that's a little troubling, because if you recall, when the Thunder were like running on all cylinders, made the finals, it was when they had Westbrook, Kevin Durant, Ibaka, and they had James Harden at the time. And, it may be the case that they only have 2 superstars and not much else. They have not built a fantastic bench around this team. Deion Waiters was such a horrible pickup last season. They may have just missed their window, which is kind of a shame, because these are 2 of the best talents in the NBA right now.
Absolutely. And another one that's very conspicuous on here is Andre Iguodala, a guy we keep worrying
about. I was going to
ask
if you noticed that.
Of course. So I think we had a conversation last year that maybe they should go with Klay Thompson over Andre Iguodala. He's getting old. He could drop off at any time. That's true, but boy, it's not happening. And he looks really spry and athletic right now, even in his 30s. So,
well, what's amazing to me about the Warriors this season, and I mentioned this a little bit with Curry earlier, but they really are stealing the playbook from kind of the Spurs here.
Yeah.
And basically what I want to mention, I just want to verify it here. But if I recall, I don't think any player is getting 36 minutes a game yet. That hasn't happened. I don't even know if any player has broken 36 minutes a game yet. And then additionally, I think most of the players on the Warriors aren't even cracking 30 minutes a game. I'm going to try and get that up in front of me quickly. But okay, so if we look at the Warriors, I'm going to Basketball Reference and doing minutes per game. But the only 2 players that are cracking 30 minutes a game on the Warriors right now are Steph Curry and Draymond Green.
Yeah.
33.8 minutes, 33.5 minutes. Are you kidding me? And I mean, Andre Iguodala, who's top 10 in the NBA right now, according to our numbers.
And this is not per minute we're looking at, by the way. We're looking at total, not per minute.
We're looking at total wins, but I mean, obviously per minute's very good too. He's 5th on the team in minutes, and he's 27.8. And then we should notice there's another drop off after Andre Iguodala. most players on the Warriors are getting 20 minutes or fewer. Festus Ezeli is at 20.4, Bogut's at 19, Sean Livingston's at 18.4 minutes per game. This team is stealing like the Spurs strategy and keeping their players rested and not overplaying them. I mean, you compare this to teams that are, gonna roll out their stars for 40 minutes a game. That's a huge advantage if your teams get to rest at the end of games.
Yeah, it does feel like Luke Walton, who's the interim coach for Steve Kerr, who's still recovering from the back surgery. In fact, interesting tidbit I'll throw in here. Luke Walton and Andre Iguodala were college teammates at Arizona, and now he's coaching Iguodala. But it feels like he has been leaning on the starters a little bit more in these quote-unquote close games, these 9-point Kings games. But you're right, despite that feeling, they're still getting these guys resting in the fourth quarter most games.
Well, I think that it's. I mean, it is important to be able to blow out the other team, and this is something Arturo has talked about, which is kind of interesting. Which is in the NBA, because teams can go on a run, you really shouldn't put on the brakes. If you're beating the crap out of a team, just keep beating them until they have no hope of coming back. And I think the Warriors do that, and that's a huge advantage, which is if you go into the fourth with such a huge lead, you don't even have to worry. Then you can rest players, but you have to get a lead that you don't have to worry about. And 10 points, 15 points is not a big enough lead not to worry about. All right, I want to see if there are any other names I want to talk about. Langston Galloway.
He's still up there.
Stayed up there and is still playing well. It's worth noting he's not really, he's not a starter on that team. I think he's another who was the player. Landry Fields back in the day. I don't think he's going to get the love or respect he deserves, especially since this team is pretty bad. So, it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see if he sticks around, but that's very promising. But the sad news for Knicks fans is that probably means he's going to be gone in 2 seasons on a stupid trade when they clear cap space to pick up Derrick Rose or something.
Yeah, I have to confess I haven't been following, the New York media at all, so I don't know what the perception of the Knicks is right now. But if you look at what Langston Galloway's production is, it's really just 3-point shooting and rebounds. So maybe he's getting labeled as again, I'll use air quotes again, a 3-and-D guy and not a star. But, man, he's really hitting those threes and rebounding.
Yeah, we love it. I don't have too many other names to talk about. I'm impressed Manu Ginobili is still playing well. Maybe Chris Bosh, maybe he just needed some time off. If you recall last season, I think he had like clots in his lungs and took the end of the season off.
Yeah.
He started off the season really hot. Oh, yeah, that is the last thing we should have talked about. Apologies. So let me just get the details in front of me. But Mario Chalmers was traded from the Miami Heat to the Memphis Grizzlies. Now, all I can say about this trade to start is I was a little baffled by it from the get-go, at least from the Memphis Grizzlies side of it. I mean, it's obviously a salary dump on the Miami Heat part, but the one position that the Memphis Grizzlies actually have playing decently this season, and I should stress decently, not great, is Mike Conley, is their point guard. So they just traded for a point guard. That's the one position they've got figured out. It was a little sad to me to see the Heat trade it because basically he's a decent point guard in the NBA, and they didn't get what did they get back from? I don't think much. But this trade was interesting to me because it's just a decent point guard going to a team that doesn't need a decent point guard, and it actually makes me upset at teams that all they need is a decent point guard. A few years ago, we talked about kind of the Jazz, where they had figured out that they figured out the bigs, right? They got Paul Millsap, they got Gobert, they had all these good bigs that were playing well, and they just needed a point guard. And what's sad to me right now is a team that's in a similar position is the Milwaukee Bucks. They really just need a backcourt. Last season they had Brandon Knight, and they wisely let him go because he was going to ask for a big payday. He was playing well, but he was playing good for a guard, but not good enough to justify over $10 million a year. So they let him walk. But they traded him for Michael Carter-Williams. Friend of the show, Ty Willinghams, hates this move, and I kind of agree because they traded for a young player with a lot of upside, but that it hasn't been a proven commodity. And really, you kind of just need someone decent in the backcourt. We've seen teams that the Los Angeles Lakers won title after title with Derek Fisher in their backcourt. The key was Derek Fisher wasn't a star, although he did have one playoffs where he shot 3 points out of his mind. But the key is Derek Fisher was a very good, average point guard. That's all you need. If you have a lot of good bigs, get an average point guard and you're a title team. And so it makes me sad to find out that basically Mario Chalmers was on the market for free, right? They were basically just looking for a salary dump. And the team that picked him up doesn't really need him. And, a team that I think could have used him was the Bucks. So that's kind of my thoughts on the trade.
Yeah, I haven't looked at it too much yet, but it does sort of feel like shuffling the deck chairs. I don't know what goes on behind the scenes, so maybe there was personalities involved. Someone was demanding someone be traded on one team or the other. Who knows? But
No, it's 100% a salary dump, and
okay,
on the Grizzlies side, I could see wanting a decent player. That's the key. He's not a bad player; he's a decent player. It's just one of those. It's not the first move I would have made as the Grizzlies, but it's also what I also say in the NBA is if you notice good moves that are beneficial to you, why not go for them?
yeah. And so Chalmers is 29 now, and that's kind of old, for the NBA. I mean, he may not return to what he was when he was younger. And they got Udrich in return, who's 33, who was also not bad when he was younger. So yeah, it's tough to see how this matters. Kind of two older backup point guards.
Yeah, and like I said, kind of semi-serviceable. The last two seasons, ironically take LeBron off the Heat and he gets worse. But he's a decent point guard that I think it's not a bad thing. It's not a super exciting trade. It was just an interesting trade. So.
If one of those teams goes on a big run right after this, the trade will probably get credit for it, even if those players aren't part of the win producing.
Yeah, that is definitely true.
Changing the culture, Dre. No, sorry, keep going.
That is a good line and one that we can't really verify. All right, well, we've actually hit about 45 minutes, which is my goal for the show. So, Brian, I'll let you get the last thought. Anything on Kobe, the top 10? Do you want to shout that out? If you see any box scores this week that you think are cool, tweet at me, at Nerd Numbers, or at NBA Geek, or at Boxscore Brian. Hashtag BSG Top 10. We'll take a look. We'd really like to put them up. Otherwise, we'll have that up next week. You can also put them in the comments. We'll take a look at them. But yeah, we're excited about that. So I'll let you get the last shot, Brian, on top 10s, Kobe Bryant, state of the NBA, any players in the top or bottom 10 that are interesting to you.
Now I don't have too much more. I'll be looking for good box scores over the next week. And I just kind of have a brief shout out to local writer Matt Steinmetz, who was tweeting me last night about Drummond. Man, Drummond's pretty good, Steinmetz. You got to watch for that guy. 15 rebounds is not bad for an off game.
All right, so I have 3 shout-outs. That's how we end the show. The first is to, let me see if I can say the name right. It's Jay Blancart. And so what happened is he tweeted out, Steph Curry is the best player on the planet right now, but Blake Griffin has quietly been elite as well. Tweets to it. And I basically made a thing. I was like, Blake Griffin's getting 29 points, 10 rebounds, and 4 assists per game. That's not quiet. And he responded, quiet meant only in relation to Curry. Blasting music at 2 a.m., that was my metaphor, Griffin, is drowned out by bombs detonating Curry. And I thought I was like, yep, that's an amazing metaphor, one-upmanship. Got to give that a shout-out. We didn't talk this at all, but obviously there's a lot of news going down in Missouri right now. Jonathan Weiler at the ESPN Watch has been covering that, so go over to the ESPNWatch.wordpress.com. Jonathan Weiler is a must-read, some good stuff there. And then this didn't make the show last week, but we actually did talk LeBron James and aging, and Dave Barry wrote a good post for Vice Sports about this on basically how players get worse as they get over 30. Basically, the entire problem with the Memphis Grizzlies, as we mentioned, LeBron James is still a great player. He's just, he went from being the best player in the NBA without question to being a good, top 20 player. And that there is a significant difference in that. So, there's a good article from Dave. Wish he'd posted it before we recorded our podcast last week, Brian, but he gets a shout out this week for it. So anyway, that is our show. We will see you next week. We'll have more top 10s. We'll have more Wall of Excitement. I'm sure there will be more stories. If you didn't find us through the site, we are at boxscoregeeks.com. You can find our show on iTunes and Stitcher at The Boxscore Geeks Show. Subscribe, upvote, really helps us out. We record live every week at twitch.tv/Nerd Numbers. And if you missed the live show, you can catch us on YouTube, channel Nerd Numbers. And with that, we will see you next week.